So if you remember last time, I was able to trace back the Marseille emperor to Sigismund, who was the Holy Roman Emperor. And I did that by looking at some of the oldest imagery of the emperor and was able to trace out who this was by following the coat of arms. So here is Sigismund, Barbara of Scilly, Holy Roman Empress and Queen of Hungary and Bohemia, was a second wife and was quite popular for her time. Here we see her in the Marseille. She also has a similar coat of arms that allowed me to triangulate and make sure, yep, I think this is the person of which this empress represents. As you see, she has blonde hair, and we see that in some of the older imagery of her. Empress Barbara was an incredible woman, especially for the time she lived. She was gifted. She was very emancipated, energetic, self-confident, and she was profoundly educated. During a time when royalty could barely sign their names, much less anyone else, Barbara knew German, Hungarian, Czech, Latin, and even some Polish. So Sigismund is at the top, Barbara's at the bottom, and in many ways they truly worked in partnership. She was not merely a baby-making vessel for royalty, and at her height she owned nearly as much land and fiefdoms as her husband. Sigismund was gone a lot, going on battles to try to unite the empire, and Barbara was acting as regent of his lands while he was gone, also very unusual for a woman at the time. It was her wisdom, intelligence, and practical administration that was able to funnel finances to Sigismund's military efforts, and she also headed a few military campaigns against their lands while he was gone. Again, very unusual for a woman of her time. Barbara was also a practicing alchemist and astrologer. Barbara co-founded the Order of the Dragon with her husband as an equal in her own right. Again, another incredible and unusual placement for a woman of her time. She was well known as a beautiful, young, charismatic, and whip-smart wife of Sigismund, which sadly was used by enemies of her husband to discredit her. One of the things said about her was, "Nowhere in the world is a more indulgent husband than Sigismund, who not only lets his wife do anything she wants, but ultimately even encourages her to take part in public dances, speak with everyone, and relate to people in such a friendly way that it is said that those who do not know her would not consider her a queen, but as a woman of some low trade." He was especially shocked that merchants' wives, various bawds, and people without important positions came to see the queen and left her apartment freely, in a way impossible in other courts of the time. However accomplished, amazing, and incredible this woman was, and powerful, she was at the mercy of men in a patriarchic society. So days before the death of her husband, Sigismund, when he could not protect her, she was accused by her son-in-law of plotting against him. And she was transported to prison and later forced to relinquish most of her possessions. And she soon decided after that, I don't really understand the link here, but she then was able at some point to find shelter in the Polish royal court, where she was in exile for a number of years. And then after that, she was able to move to one of the remaining fiefdoms that she could own because it was given to her by her husband. And she spent the rest of her life as a dowager queen in Bohemia. She finally died of the plague epidemic and is buried in Prague. And as is the custom of a dangerously brilliant woman, and yet again in the power of patriarchy, it was not long before she was painted in a bad light. The court of Habsburg tried to accuse her of being a godless woman due to her astrology and alchemy interests, ignoring that she literally co-founded the Order of the Dragon with her husband, and rumors eventually turned into legends that sullied her name. As the centuries passed, Queen Barbara was the victim of some pretty heinous beliefs about her. In Croatian folklore, Barbara is often identified with the figure of the Black Queen. The The Black Queen is described as a lady with long black hair, dressed in black, and she had many lovers. And when she didn't like them anymore, she simply threw them over the wall of her castle. It is also said that she was a bird whisperer who kept a pet black raven that would attack people on her command. And most egregiously, she was even portrayed as a lesbian vampire, a beautiful but nefarious creature. She allegedly kept a female harem during her exile and had orgies with young girls. And hey, I'm not going to hate on a lesbian vampire. You do you. But the point of the fact is she was beautiful, she was powerful, she lived a comparatively free life in the manner of the Italian Renaissance, and that she's an early example of an emancipated woman who absolutely frightened her male contemporaries, which led to her being overthrown when she really was no threat, and it led to this nefarious reputation as a lesbian a vampire. And it's so often that when we think of the Empress, we've been taught and led to believe that the Empress means the mother energy, the vessel, softness, kindness, nurturing, and that can be all true. But when we look at the historical representations of the Empress at the time the deck was made, a very, very different figure emerges. A woman brilliant, a statistician. She was incredibly smart. And it makes me wonder and also weep. I got very emotional when I did my deep dive on this because I feel like we was robbed, y'all. Seriously, like this Empress is far more dynamic. She can have babies and all of that good stuff, and that is true. But the meaning of the Empress, if we're going to go by who the Empress actually represented, and the Empress that we know and we're told that the Empress represents now, are two very, very different people. And the more I do this, the more I realize how much of what I understand the tarot to be was expressed through a patriarchal lens that shaped what the women of the tarot were in what suited them politically or spiritually at the time. Doesn't it make you question everything you think you know about each woman in the tarot deck and who they really are and how they changed over time? I do, and it makes me filled with feminist rage, to be honest with you. So this is going to be part 1. This is talking about the story of Barbara as the Empress in the Marseille Tarot. Part 2 is going to be talking about how she was erased from history.